Hello, beautiful humans. Welcome to the Midlife Revolution. I'm your host, Megan Connor, and today I have a wonderful guest who is going to enlighten us about some of the problematic dynamics within high demand religion. This is a subject I've been wanting to talk about for a really long time. I spent my entire life surrounded by narcissists and people with narcissistic personality traits. And I've long been passionate about trying to help people learn and understand more about these traits and how you can successfully navigate relationships with people, even when they exhibit narcissistic traits. Also, I'm equally passionate about teaching people the skills and the tools that they need to use to defend against narcissistic personality traits and the ways in which these show up in our lives, in our relationships. Okay, so John, welcome to the Midlife Revolution. I met John on TikTok, and you go by House of Deconstruction there on TikTok, right?
That's right. Glad to be here.
So tell us a little bit about your background and how you got here.
Yeah, well, it's quite the journey, but that's the beauty of it. Let's see. I'm 38, and let's see. I was a junior at BYU when I first started questioning, and it unraveled pretty quickly, I would say. And it was a struggle. I think, I've talked to some of my other friends who were at BYU at the time, and we all kind of left together. And unless you really feel that void with purpose, you can get swept away in a lot of different things. And I kind of was good and bad. But, over the past 10 years, I struggled with alcoholism, addiction, and just really finding who I was and what all this means once you leave the church. And that's led me to a lot of, deconstructing, changing the way I think, meeting different types of people, just really experiencing life to the fullest, both the good and the bad, right? And that was going well. And I kind of felt like I'd hit some breakthroughs and I was feeling really good, was very sober, felt like I'd conquered that. And I wanted to reach out and kind of talk to other ex-Mormons and kind of give them some tips, because it had been, it's been 12, 13 years where I've learned a lot. And what I was seeing on TikTok was a lot of people who had just left the church. And so I was like, hey, I could have really used some help when I was leaving the church and after, to kind of understand that. So I started making videos, obviously, like a lot of us do, but more so geared towards how to navigate it with some compassion and love there. And I was really excited about it. And then, what was that, about 6 months ago? And then life really kind of slapped me in the face, and in a good way. It's led to a lot of awakenings and unblocking things. And I was actually with my previous partner, girlfriend, who I thought was going to be, she was the one. She was not raised in the church, a therapist. We had amazing conversations. We'd get really deep. And I have to say, a lot of what I'm going to talk to today, I owe to her, and actually listening to her and understanding her perspective, which is what is so crucial that we men are going to need to do. And we should have been doing this whole time, is really listening and trying to put ourselves in females' shoes, because it is a different reality. And so I kind of, I realized that I'd lost this person that I thought was going to be that special person. And I realized that it was my fault, and I had hurt her. And it kind of, we're going back and forth towards the end, and I finally accepted, okay, this woman is no longer going to be in my life. She's not a part of my future, which was tough. But we all, that happens. And so I tried to start manifesting and getting back into a routine and really trying to get on the right path again. And I imagined if I had everything I wanted, and I imagined what a day that would look like. And I realized that I was still going to be stuck with me and stuck with this mind. And I didn't want that. I didn't want to really be here anymore, because I realized then I didn't really like who I was. And that got me thinking, there's just so many different things where I acted a certain way that I couldn't understand how other people acted. And so I started to seek, her and I had talked about, our parents, and they were kind of narcissists, and my dad for sure was a narcissist. And you never think that's going to be you, but I was desperate, and my world had kind of collapsed, and it wasn't working for me. And I didn't realize I was, but I took some assessments and I scored pretty high for a narcissistic personality disorder. And
Wow.
so that got me thinking, and I answered them really honestly.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's crucial. And so I scored pretty high on a few of them, and I was like, okay. And then I went on TikTok and I found other men who were diagnosed narcissists who would talk about it.
Mm.
And I found one in particular, and I listened to everything he said, and I agreed with, resonated with, and thought the same as he did about 80%. And I
Wow.
was like, okay, but that really helped me because it made me understand what narcissism is. And really, it's a lot of shame. And it's a lack of ability to self-validate and to love yourself.
Mm.
And that it's simply basically a coping mechanism of how you were raised and how to feel safe, how to feel seen. And some of those behaviors become maladaptive as you become an adult. And that honestly really, really helped. I felt a little bit of relief, and I hate that it took hurting someone you really, really love to get to that point. But we got to talk about the tough things. And I
Yeah.
think this is a way where hopefully other men can see this, because honestly, right now, how Mormons are raised, how most of men are raised in the patriarchy and the entitlement that we feel. If I were a woman, I wouldn't want any part of it. And so this movement of women saying, we don't need men, you don't at all. And kind of figuring out this was really, really eye-opening. And that's not to say that all men here are narcissists, but we all have it a little bit. And there's a spectrum. And my hope
Right.
is that I think in the coming years, as information just is so rapid, that we're going to talk about narcissism the same way we talk about addiction, with a lot more empathy and understanding that people get addicted because they're hurt and they're trying to soothe. And
Yeah.
that's where I think narcissism can play a role here. And obviously there's a big spectrum, right? There are some narcissists out there that are just so far gone that there's no real hope, I think. But I think it's a lot more nuanced to that. And I think a lot of guys out there that have narcissistic tendencies have no idea. And I can kind of give input and light of what that feels like from my perspective as the abuser, or I didn't think I was at all.
Yeah.
But going back through it, I absolutely was. And once you figure that out and you have that self-awareness, then the healing can come. And I have to say, in the past 6 months, I did a lot of healing, some inner child work, confronting this narcissism. And I can tell you that is the greatest joy I've ever felt. And it felt like, for the first time in my life, joy was accessible from within. And it opens up a whole new world that I really don't think a lot of men even know is there, because of the way we're raised and because of the differences and how the patriarchy and the church is set up. It creates a lot of blind spots and a
Yeah.
lot of subconscious things that you're not even aware of that really block your happiness. And once again, I owe a lot of this to listening to women. If you're trying to listen to a guy who talks about how women feel, that's your first mistake. Please stop. Listen to women, and I think you'll be amazed. So it's been a journey, and that's why I'm here. And I think more of my content is going to be talking about being the narcissist from the abuser standpoint, and kind of maybe either helping women see if there's hope, because I do believe it can be healed. I really do. That comes with your self-awareness, your desire to change, and your ability to actually put yourself in another person's shoes and care
Yeah.
about other people, and getting out of the world revolves around me.
Yeah. Yeah. So first of all, I want to just say, I think it's really amazing that you got to the space where you could have that self-awareness and that introspection, because a lot of people never make it to that place. A lot of people, as you said, these behaviors that were really just an effort to be seen and heard, they become maladaptive. And for a lot of people, those behaviors become their entire personality, and they lose the ability to be introspective the way that you've done. So that's what I think is really amazing about your journey. And I just want to rewind a little bit. So for my listeners, my viewers who maybe don't know very much about narcissism, just to sort of reiterate, I think narcissism is largely misunderstood. I think it's become kind of a word that people throw around because we have like this much understanding of it. So I want people to become more educated about what narcissism is and what it isn't, about the fact that it's a spectrum. So just if we can talk briefly, you and I, about the fact that we all have some narcissistic traits. All of us have jealousy, spitefulness, selfishness, those types of things. Some people think
Manipulating
that
things to get what we need. Yeah.
yeah, manipulating things to get what we need. And I think that's like, that starts to get to the unhealthy side of the spectrum. Like, it's one thing for me to say, wow, I really wish my partner would call me back more often. It's another thing for me to, call them and pretend that there's some kind of an emergency or situation that needs handling. That would be
Yeah.
manipulative, right?
Right.
Yeah, so doing things like that to get our needs met rather than as you were saying, self-validating. So again, we all have these tendencies towards problematic or maladaptive behaviors. The difference is that a lot of us hopefully see that they're maladaptive, and we think that's not the way I want to relate to someone, and we think I'd rather be more authentic. But a lot of us get put in a situation very young, especially in high demand religion, where we aren't seen and heard because we're not really allowed to be individuals. We have to fit into this little box that was given to us. So a lot of us do develop, I guess, maladaptive ways of relating to people in order to be seen and heard, and I think that does start very young. But I think that you're right in saying that for men in the church, it's a lot different than for women in the church, because you are instilled with a sense of entitlement. So can you talk just a little bit?
Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe before we get into that, I'll just say that for those who don't know a lot about narcissistic personality disorder, there's a difference between the personality disorder and just having narcissistic traits.
Mm-hmm.
When the traits sort of spin out of control, that's when it becomes the whole personality disorder. But you can have traits of narcissism without having the personality disorder.
Of course.
And some of the traits that I think people need to be aware of that are some of the most common traits of narcissism are that need to feel validated, that need to feel like they're the center of attention, sometimes arrogance or inflated
Mm-hmm.
sense of
Mm-hmm.
self-importance, fantasies of success and power. And I think the two things really that stand out to me most of the time are that lack of empathy, like you were talking about, the inability to put yourself in someone else's shoes. And the other one is that inability to take responsibility for your own behavior, your own actions, always trying to blame it on someone
That's a
else. And you
huge
overcame
one.
that. So I think that's pretty amazing.
That is a huge one. Not taking responsibility. And of course, women can have it, but men especially, because of how we're raised. And we'll get into all that. But you're absolutely correct. What really helped me when I was kind of discovering I was a narcissist and listening to another man talk about being a narcissist what really resonated with me is you will do pretty much anything at the cost of others and you don't even realize it to avoid feeling shame.
Mm.
And so that comes with avoiding responsibility. And I think that comes a lot with how narcissists can make you feel crazy, where if you're asking your significant other to participate more or whatever, and then they emotionally manipulate and they don't want to feel like we don't want to feel like we've done anything wrong. Heaven forbid my partner sees that I'm actually not who I said I was. And so we do anything, and I didn't even realize I was doing this. We do anything to avoid accountability. And, I'm trying, business has been hard, it's a victim. And so there's different types of narcissism. And honestly, I've looked at all of them and I'm like, I've done all of those different things. So I'm not sure if I necessarily agree with being pigeonholed into a certain type. I use them all. And really, you do anything to avoid feeling shame and feeling like you really aren't that great. But at the same time, you're not great. And you don't want anyone to see that, but you don't consciously know that. I mean, all of this is coming after the fact, but now I can piece it together once you make that awareness and you're willing to take responsibility.
Yeah.
And say, oh my gosh, I can see that now. I see how I love bombed. I see how I pushed that relationship even when she wanted to take it slow. And I just thought I was panicking, and I just thought I want this. I know it's for the best. She's the one, and I pushed. Well, that's love bombing, and that's not healthy. And these are things you kind of learn after the fact. So let's get back to what we were kind of talking about. Of narcissism really is the core of it. I think is you have no idea how to self-validate, and you need validation from others.
Yeah.
And then that makes you very self-centered. It makes you very selfish in that what I just need my needs met. And in what it should be is how can I improve my partner's life? How can I make her life better or his life better? And instead it becomes, I need my needs met or I'm going to panic. And then that person becomes your only source of validation. And that's a bad place to be, because I couldn't, and she would say, come on, you got to love all your parts and you can do this, and, really supportive. And she became my only source of validation. And that happens all too often with narcissists. And that's a recipe for disaster when you can't self-validate and you don't have the confidence on your own to create your own happiness and to validate yourself. That becomes a very toxic dynamic where you're essentially just using the other person to get what you need. And that's not love. Right. And when this is going on, I thought I was fully in love, and I still think I was. And like you said, like the personality disorder versus tendencies, that's a vast spectrum. But I still think I had so many blind spots that I would probably put myself honestly all the way over into the personality disorder, but I'm like, just barely. I think self-awareness is crucial, and just taking accountability. And instead of being, oh, you're just being crazy, or and there's a lot of blind spots that we as men have that make that difficult, that drive women insane. And that's where kind of being raised in the church can kind of add to that. And as we said before, there's certain check marks that if you experience growing up, you're more likely to become a narcissist. And unfortunately, high control religion, Mormonism, enforces and fosters a lot of them. It checks a lot of the boxes.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. What are some of the things you experienced as a child growing up in Mormonism, especially as a man growing up in Mormonism, that sort of taught you that you needed these types of behaviors?
Well, let's first start off with the very obvious, from the time you're a little boy: power, priesthood, preside, authority, hold dominion over your family. Mm-hmm. You're taught you have the power of God, using the word power, authority, all of that gives you a sense of entitlement, and obviously thinking you're the only true church on the earth, and you're a guy, where everything is just handed to you. And you don't really even see that growing up, but after the fact you do. And I think that language is really dangerous, because it makes us feel like we rule the world. Yeah. And we run this.
Yeah. So for those who maybe have never been Mormon or don't know a lot about Mormonism, when young men turn 12 years old, they're given the power of the priesthood, laying on of hands and everything.
Priesthood. Yeah.
Yes. And so Mormons
Right there in the
believe
name.
that when Jesus was on the earth, that he had the power of God, obviously, to heal, to bless, and that he gave that power also to his apostles. Well, Mormons believe that when the apostles were killed, that power was taken from the earth, and that Joseph Smith was chosen by God to restore that power, bring it back. So Mormons believe that heavenly beings appeared to Joseph Smith, put their hands on his head, and restored the power of the priesthood to him. They also believe that Joseph Smith then did the same to other men. They call it an ordination, or being ordained into the priesthood. And they're taught that they literally possess the power of God. And men are taught from the age of 3, basically, indoctrinated into, we're going to receive the priesthood when we're 12, and we'll have that power of the priesthood as long as we keep the commandments and we're worthy. And then you continue to progress into higher and higher offices in the priesthood with more responsibilities. And ultimately, men are taught that it is their responsibility to preside over the home. So it's a man marrying a woman over whom he has dominion. When I went through the temple back in 2004, I was taught that my husband would listen to the Lord, and that I would listen to my husband, who would then listen to the Lord, which was confusing for me because my husband wasn't an active member. And so I was like, well, do I not get to talk directly to God then, since my husband isn't? Anyway, that was a totally separate situation. But I can imagine, as a man growing up, knowing that you're going to accept these ever increasing responsibilities, and therefore have an ever increasing sense of power. I can imagine that would be a big burden.
Yeah. I don't know if I saw it as necessarily a burden, but it was just like understood that we had more power. So if you start a kid very young to think you have more power than women, that's going to stay with you. That's imprinted. And I think in the temple, I think I read back in 1990 or something, they changed it from, there was the law of the husband. Like, y'all have to do so, I mean, come on, guys. What do you think you're going to end up? So, yes. So we, from a very young age, just the principles in the church lead you to believe that you are better than a woman. It's the hard thing to say. I don't love it, but that's what we thought. And when you're taught,
sorry to interrupt you. At any time when you were growing up between the ages of, say, like 12 and when you went through the temple for the first time, were you ever taught at any time that women had access to the power of the priesthood through their temple covenants? Or were you ever taught that women could ever exercise any kind of priesthood power? Was it a surprise to you to find women were allowed to do certain things in the temple to exercise priesthood power? Were you taught any of that growing up?
No.
Nor was I.
No.
I just wanted to make sure.
No, not at all. Not at all. So you have, I mean, even from primary to Sunday school, like it was very obvious. And I think you could comment too, from being the female side of it. It's just obvious that we are held to preside. And I even looked at the church teachings on how to do that, and it just says preside in righteousness. So
yeah,
we can get into this later, but the church teaches a lot without actually teaching jack. It's a lot of abstract, eternal truths that don't teach you how to foster an emotionally healthy relationship with a female. It just says, I got to BYU, get out there and date, find a wife. How should we go about doing that? Just do it. Yeah. Just do it. Just do it. Just do it. And so you're taught from a very young age that if you do the things, you get these milestones, right? Even in like scouts, you get praised for it. Then it's baptism. Then it's the priesthood when you're 12. Then you're a teacher. Then you're a priest. Then you get the Melchizedek priesthood. And all of that, and it's true of any high control Christian religion, that leads you to external validation, which is the core not good part of narcissism. If you're, and it really just leads to, you just check these boxes. You check these boxes, and the need for internal examination, self-reflection, you don't need to do that. You don't need to do that at all. And then even as a young kid, you have these responsibilities that are public. I mean, you pass the sacrament, that is public. That is in front of everyone. Okay. And then you got to go bless the sacrament. And you're nervous as hell, right? Mm-hmm. But if you do a good job, people praise you, and you're commended for what you do. So from a very young age, you are taught that what appears on the outside is really, really important. Okay. And then let's all be very clear. Like, I'm assuming how your parents acted at church versus at home were two different things. There's two different people. Now, if your parents acted the exact same at church as they did at home, you're probably not going to be a narcissist. You're probably not going to manipulate, but come on. Like, even, people getting up to give talks and they use that spirit voice, don't use a Google search. I'm like, dude, no one talks like that. No one. But we all learn that as kids. We all learn that. That's imprinted.
Yeah. And so there's a couple of things I just want to pause and really highlight the importance of this, especially for those people who were not Mormon or don't know much about the LDS Church. What you're talking about is what I've said so many times. Oh, puppy. I love schnauzers.
She's the best. Okay, come on. You want to come on? Keep going.
What's her name?
London.
Thank you so much for bombing our video today.
She's teaches you what unconditional love is, and treating this dog has definitely helped my narcissism.
Oh, she's sweet. So yeah, one of the main things I want to call attention to, and what I talk about all the time on my channel, is that my family members would put on this veneer, their public face. And this is where we learned it was in church, that in church, we act as if everything is fine in our family. We act as if we are behaving perfectly. And then when we get home, it's a completely different story. When we get home, we're rude to each other. We're sarcastic. The kids will beat up on each other. We will tell on each other. We'll inform on each other to get validation from our parents. And it teaches you that it's okay to do that. Not only that it's okay, but that what I felt was like, is everybody else like this? Because I remember probably the first time that it really just hit me. My mom had been yelling at me for something I did wrong, whatever the flavor of the day was, of the hour. And then the phone rang. And she had just been yelling at me and was just like very angry with me. And then she picked up the phone and she goes, hello. Mm-hmm. And the switching in that tone of voice just grated on me so much. And it made me so angry because I was like, why can you be nice to this person on the phone who you don't even know who it is yet? Because we didn't have caller ID yet.
Right.
And yet your daughter, who you're supposed to be loving and caring for, whatever minuscule thing that I did to make her angry with me. And I just, that was so confusing to me as a child. I don't think I was any older than like 10 or 11 when that happened, when it resonated with me for the first time. And I started noticing more and more this pattern where we definitely have a way that we behave in public and in front of other people, but it doesn't match at all what is happening inside the home. I think that I didn't make the association until you are talking about it right now, that is a breeding ground for narcissism. Yeah, because that's one of the biggest traits of narcissistic people is that their words and their actions don't match. They have one face in public and a completely different one in private.
Yeah. Reputation and appearance is more important. And so what do I learn? I learned that, and especially, so this is where, that can happen for women too. But where men, I think it's more toxic, is the leadership positions, right? So my dad, and to his credit, he's passed away. I don't blame my dad for anything. And that's the thing. You can't blame anyone for anything. We're all just acting under what we were taught, and our programming and what we saw growing up is so crucial. And if you compared what my dad's dad did compared to what my dad crushed it. My granddad owned a gas station, and my dad became a really successful doctor. He was a bishop. He was in the stake presidency. He was admired. He had everything that you would want as a man in the Mormon church. But so we as kids, we see this, and you see all these people coming up and praising your dad and saying, "Oh my gosh, I love your dad. He's just the best." Because my dad put on a mask at church, and he was there for those people. And all of us, I'm the youngest of four, we're all like, who are you talking about? And so that reinforces for us, oh, okay, how we act at church and how other people perceive us is more important than authenticity. Mm-hmm. And it's rampant in the church. It is just, and no one does anything to stop it. I mean, all the brethren who get up there and talk, who use that voice, like, you don't talk like that, man. Like, it's laughable these days. And so,
and they would pass it off as, I'm being influenced by the Spirit, and that's why I'm talking that way, because I'm under the influence of the Holy Ghost. And when the Holy Ghost is really with me, I take on a different demeanor. I'm gentler, I'm kinder, my voice is softer. So that's a big thing too. That persona.
I mean, I remember now growing up, I didn't do anything terribly wrong. I didn't drink or anything. I was at a high school where there was like 10 Mormons out of 1,500, right? I never drank or anything. Maybe a little fooling around with a female or two, which was really, really bad. And my parents almost like disowned me, and they sent me to Provo for a summer to get away from this girl. But did they teach me why that was bad? Did they teach me and sit me down and say, John, no, they got pissed because everyone in the school found out, everyone in church found out. And you quickly see, like, it's more important for what everyone else finds out. So what does that foster? It fosters a lack of integrity. Yeah. All that matters is what is seen. And so many times I saw, like, my parents or my mom would keep things from my dad, so he wouldn't, like, this goes on in the home where there is lying, there is just doing what you have to do to survive. So,
well, I do want to go back for a second, because there was a second thing that you were talking about that I think is so important to the formation of personality disorder traits. And it's the bishop's interview, the worthiness interview. And when you're talking about getting the priesthood as a 12-year-old and then advancing to the next level, like, I know that you had this, and I had it probably to a lesser degree because, women, we had our class presidencies when we were young women. It wasn't the same or as important as the priesthood, but we got a bishop's interview every year as well. And it's this idea that you have to have someone else declare you worthy. Like, your worthiness and your sense of self doesn't come from you. It comes from your priesthood leader, who tells you that either you're worthy or you're not worthy. And so it develops in us the very idea of external validation. It's built on external validation, because it's not enough for us to say, I feel worthy. Although they did start adding that later on, like the last temple recommend question is now, do you think that you're worthy, or would you declare yourself worthy to enter the temple? But they didn't have that when we were kids. And so for me, very much, I learned that, as you were saying, I had to check a set of boxes in order to have someone else evaluate me and declare me to be worthy. And so it sets us up to need external validation for the rest of our lives. And the other piece of that is the perfectionism, when you're talking about giving the sacrament prayer in front of everybody as a 16-year-old boy, you had to do it perfectly. If you got one word wrong, they made you start over and do it again. And the shame that must have come up for all of you every time you
I
got
think
something
that's
wrong
where
and
we
had to do
all
it over.
developed anxiety. We all
Right.
developed anxiety. Passing the sacrament or blessing the sacrament or whatever, if we had maybe done something that week that we're worried, oh my gosh, do I need to tell the bishop about that? Am I worthy to pass the sacrament? And then, of course, if you do the right thing, you go talk to the bishop. Well, now he's saying you're unworthy to pass the sacrament.
Yeah.
Everyone can see that.
Right.
Or you're unworthy to take the sacrament. Everyone can see that. And so there's PTSD all up in that.
It teaches us that it's not safe to fail. It teaches us that it's not safe to be authentic, because even the smallest, most minute transgression or mistake is going to be seen by everyone, and you're going to receive consequences that are very public.
Very public. I mean, you try passing the sacrament tray to your dad, and he has no idea what's going on, and only you and your mom know because you've hid it from the dad because he would just lose his shit. That's devastating. But you're absolutely right. From a very young age, we have to go into a room alone with an older gentleman who determines if we are worthy. The problem with the church is it really disconnects you from self. I can only be blessed, or I can only be happy, or I can only have joy if Heavenly Father, if I do all the right things, and I can get my love from Heavenly Father, instead of I am just endless light and love, and I have that capability within myself.
Yeah.
You always got to rely on somebody else. And then you got to get a little temple recommend, or you have to be worthy each year growing up to be deemed worthy, where they ask you some really personal questions that make you feel really uncomfortable. And, you know, you maybe you had swear words in your mind too much the last week, and you're panicking because you don't know if you're going to pass this worthiness thing because, oh, by the way, it's Ward Temple night and the youth are going to do temple baptisms. And if you don't go, your dad and mom, they know something is up. And that is beyond horrifying.
Right.
So you're absolutely right. It's unsafe to screw up. You know, I'm sure there's some parents out there that were really cool, and I'm hoping that these more modern parents these days, that's being done away with. But for our age group, man, that was traumatizing.
Yeah. And it's not just your parents that see you not participating in Ward Temple night. And for me personally, I lived in Connecticut from during middle school and high school years, and we had to travel to Washington, D.C. to go to the temple. So it's a 6-hour drive.
Okay. Yeah.
And
big deal.
It's a big deal. And we would usually find some kind of overnight accommodations. We would stay with members or something like that so that we could drive down, do baptisms, stay the night, go to church, and come back the next day. And so it was a really big deal to have an overnight trip with everybody, all of the youth in the ward. And if you didn't go, it was like, well, what's wrong with you? What did you do wrong? Gossip. And also, back in that day, you were not allowed to do baptisms for the dead as a female if you were on your period.
Oh my
because
gosh.
They were afraid.
I didn't even think about that.
I guess they were afraid that we would contaminate the baptismal font. And so it didn't matter whether you used pads or tampons. If you were on your period, you were not allowed to get into the baptismal font. And so we were assigned a task of either passing out towels or helping in some other way. But for some reason, for some people, it was a little bit of a steam valve of a let off, because it's like, okay, well, if I'm not worthy to go, I'm just going to tell them I'm on my period.
I would do that for
nobody
sure.
will think that's weird. They'll all just assume that's the reason I'm not participating. But it was such a weird thing. And it was yet again, another way that teachings of the church made me feel disconnected from my body, made me feel ashamed about my body, and made me feel like I was less than and not clean to participate because of something I had no control over, you know?
Well, that's just another kind of example of like something we were, not that they would teach that, but just very unaware as being a man of other people's issues and problems. Just finding out about that now, being 38. But of
I'm so
course,
sorry.
that's a common thing that should be considered.
It also just goes to how disconnected and uninformed the male leaders of the church are about femininity, feminine hygiene, a female's body, thinking about garments being designed by men and issues that women have specific to garments that men wouldn't have. For example, garments causing yeast infections and other problems. So it's like, if they really were talking to God, I don't think that they would have this lack of information or lack of knowledge. God would let them know, okay, I know maybe you think it's gross if a woman's on her period, but it's not going to hurt the baptismal font if she gets in the water. If they were really talking to God, I don't think they would be so ignorant. But anyway, that was a tangent.
No, it's a great tangent, and it's a perfect example of the arrogance and the entitlement and the lack of empathy of figuring out your perspective. Getting a female's perspective growing up in the church as a man, don't need to do it. And what I saw, the activity in the home for a man, at least for me, was very superficial. It was within the Mormon church. There's doctrine, and then there's some kind of gray areas where it differs from family to family, right?
Yeah.
So, for example, in my family, my dad was so against caffeine, like to a scary point. Like we would have to, we all had this, playing a little league soccer game, and you go and they bring drinks after, and there's no Sprite. And so you literally have to just stare at the cans and say, I can't have any of that because my dad won't let me have caffeine. And okay, swimming on Sunday was he would not allow that, and keeping the Sabbath day holy. But we could totally watch football, even sometimes go to friends' houses, but swimming was just like absolutely not. And then
is it because he believed that Satan had dominion over the water?
I didn't know, because he never taught us why.
Okay, got it.
He just
That's something I heard later on.
Yeah. That's
the reason
definitely
they don't let missionaries swim is because Satan has dominion over the water, which I don't know how that works with the rest of the theology or whatever, but it's another one of those weird Mormon myths.
So this is the reason I bring it up is, but also my dad and my mom never went to the temple ever. That was that was not a thing. And we also never had, even when it was like required, not once, family home evening.
Wow.
And it shows you, and I'm not saying that all Mormon families do that, but it shows you can pick and choose. Yeah. It shows you that it's not really that important. And once again, that just solidified that what goes on in the home and behind closed doors doesn't matter as much.
Yeah.
But going to church and being in a church, boy, that's important. But going to the temple, they didn't do that. And but then like crazy about caffeine, like so when you have that, you just have this, and maybe why I developed more narcissistic tendencies more so than other people was I saw that you could pick and choose, and it really didn't matter. And what really mattered was what was seen, your reputation, that outward appearance, and So I thought about that, and it's funny, like the one thing that forced my dad to be with family at home, he avoided. And so what do you think that taught us? Like this is one thing. And so he was really absent, emotionally absent father. So my mom tried to pick up the slack for that. And that's also another formula for narcissism, that dynamic.
Yeah. So that the example of picking and choosing which rules we're going to follow sort of gives you this sense of entitlement of like, I'm important enough that I get to choose what I'm going to do and not do. Yeah, I'm going to choose which rules I'm going to follow and which ones don't apply to me. So that this implication that some of the rules don't apply to me and I get to pick which ones they are. Wow. This is blowing my mind.
We see that growing up. And so what does that make us think?
Yeah. I mean, these are all things that I knew about the church, especially after leaving the church. I think I became disenfranchised with the culture of the church a long, long time ago, because as a female and also as a female married to someone who wasn't active in the church, I was like a third-class citizen. And then when I got divorced, it was even worse. So I already knew some of these things about the culture being really unhealthy. I didn't get to the truth claims until much later. So I already was in this space where I knew this stuff was unhealthy. But drawing the parallels between how we are brought up in the church and narcissism, this is blowing my mind, like connecting those dots. And I think it's just, man, this is such an important thing for people to understand and to talk about.
Yeah.
This is really, really important.
I hope, for the female audience out there, the different way we were raised, and obviously I'm not condoning it, advocating for it. It's just, it is what it is. One important, really crucial thing that I wanted to talk about is the male white privilege in the church. And it's really, really there. And it causes a lot of arrogance and naivety and ignorance. And it's really strong in the church. And so let's talk about privilege. A good example is we've all had parents or grandparents that maybe, say something racist or out of touch, and they don't see their own privilege, or they expect, that race, whatever, they go down that route, and it's clear that you can see their privilege. Well, all men raised in the church have that, and we don't even know it. And it comes from, for example, let's say you were dating someone who's not your same race. And I know this is a harsh example, but for women, you can kind of begin to see, if you're dating someone who's not in your race and you assume their reality and their experiences and their privileges and their problems are the exact same as yours, that's really naive and really destructive. And you are going to have a lot of issues.
Yeah.
All right. And unfortunately, the way the church is set up and the patriarchy and everything, men were born and raised with that sense of entitlement, where not only do we think we are superior than you, good quote, but we're blind to the fact that your experience is far different than ours. We think your experience is the same as ours, which is just dumb. That would be like assuming someone of a different race, their experience is different. And that, I think, is how different even a white male and a white female in the church is, with that type of privilege, where we're at the top in terms of oppression, right? The only people that can really oppress the white male is another white male. And I know this sounds terrible, but it's just the reality of the patriarchy.
Yeah.
And so women can be persecuted and oppressed by the men. And when you're up at the top, you're too busy. I got to preside. I have to provide. I have to do all these things. I'm not going to concern myself with your experience. And the church does nothing to prevent that. Growing up, I mean, just little things like, oh, the sister missionary or a sister is giving a talk at General Conference. We can all take a nap. Like, this is just rampant. And, and not thinking about how women are judged for being a stay-at-home mom. They're judged for wearing nice clothes. They're judged for wearing gym clothes. They're judged for being a career woman. They're judged for every little thing. And they're supposed to just cater to the man. And so the only way that changes is for a man to really try to put themselves in the shoes of a female. And that's, unless you really want to, that's hard to do. And that just breeds elitism, and
Yeah.
I deserve you to take care of everything. And I mean, if you just, once you start to see through a lens of a female, and you really have to go through an exercise, like, okay, let's imagine that the female race is, they're all 6'5" to 8 feet tall. They all weigh 250 to 450 pounds. They're extremely aggressive. They can overpower you. They can hurt you. They run the world. They laugh at you for pretty much everything you do, where you're just supposed to accommodate them at every turn. You are going to be judged by them if you're a career man. You're going to be judged by them if you're a great dad. You're going to be judged for wearing a suit. You're going to be judged for wearing shorts. You're going to be judged for not taking the kids on outings enough. You're going to be judged left and right. And I can promise you, no man wants that reality. But you have to take a step and imagine what that's like, so that there can be tons of more sympathy and empathy, and realizing how lucky we are. And men and men in the church, in the patriarchy, we have benefited the most. I think it hurts everyone, obviously.
Yeah.
But we've benefited the most. And so we have the most responsibility to unlearn and have more compassion and uncover these blind spots. And once you do, you can start to see it everywhere. Like, he's a really famous jolly comedian, Nate Bargatze, whatever. He's got a Netflix special right now out, and most people are just laughing at it, but he's basically just showing how incompetent he is, and how his wife has to literally do everything for him. Everything. He doesn't even know what bank he goes to, and it's just assumed that the wife does that. And once you start to, like, it's just like, man, that would get really old.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, narcissism within a relationship can cause all kinds of damage. And so what I'm saying is, men in the church are never taught about the suppression. We're never taught to look from your perspective, because why would we? We preside, and how do you think the brethren go home and treat their wives? Honestly, do you think it's pretty equitable? Do you think they're really sweet and kind? I don't, and we all know that, no one's arguing that. And so what does that teach us? That that's okay.
Yeah.
You got Bednar shooing his wife away to sit down before he stands. Like, it's just toxic.
Yeah.
And so it's going to take listening to women, putting ourselves, trying to understand your perspective. And until we do, we're going to have a tough time.
Yeah. I think that I think you're right about the reason that we're not aware, that men are not aware of the disparity, is because what would that look like? Can you imagine being on the correlation committee in Salt Lake City and saying, we should really include some course material for men about how their wives feel oppressed at home? That's not going to go over. It's not going to be included. It's like, where's the biblical, what scripture references can we give for that? Well, we don't have any, because there isn't anything. There's nothing in the scriptures that can teach a man to be informed about how a woman feels about being largely excluded from scripture, about how there are no women's voices in the Book of Mormon, about how the only things in the Doctrine and Covenants that mention women are chastising them, and then giving them sort of an appeasement of power, and then threatening them with a flaming sword if they don't do what the man says, So I agree with you. It's a hard thing to even bring up in a church setting, because if the people creating the course material aren't even aware of it, how is it ever going to get taught? I just don't think it is.
It's not, because they're all narcissists, and the first shot that they think of taking another person's opinion, it's not going to go well, or they're going to skirt it and be like, that's not really that important. And
it's not a real concern.
It's not a real concern, because they don't have to go through it.
I wanted to talk a little bit about your dad and his trajectory. You've talked about him having some positions of authority, of people looking up to him, of your mom picking up the slack. Can you talk about sort of the different positions that he held and how that impacted your family and the example that was for you as his son?
Well, when I was super young, he got called to be the bishop of the singles ward. And so I remember we had a big house. I remember having the singles ward come over all the time for parties and just events. Because my dad was a great guy in that. He was very giving. But also, you could argue he wanted everyone to see how great he was,
He was
which
also
is,
really successful professionally, right?
yes. So he was an OBGYN and a very good one here in Texas. And he brought thousands of Mormon babies into the world. He brought thousands of non-Mormon babies into the world. And he was an amazing doctor, and he took great care of those women with gentleness and kindness. This is what I've heard them all say. I did not know. And to his credit, he would never brag or anything about how great of a doctor was, but he was a really good doctor, and he's very financially did very well, very well. And
He was absent from the home a lot anyway because of his career.
yeah, I mean, it was common for him to get paged with a beeper. We all remember beepers, to go deliver a baby. It happened a lot where we would be on vacation and he would have to show up 2 to 3 days late because he would have to stay. And he was very absent. I mean, he did his best to be present at games and obviously church. But when it came to him coming home after work, there was just nothing left for this guy.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing. I mean, he would fall asleep pretty instantly. So I have a deep appreciation for that, because he did give it his all for his patients. And then he was called, when I was kind of high school age, he was called in to be in the stake presidency. And I remember very vividly, my mom came to me and was like, "Your dad's in the stake presidency now. Don't do anything to embarrass him." And so that's just another outward appearance and reputation is really important. He was not present at home. I never saw him lift wash a dish. Never did anything like that. Didn't really help out, but he provided, which is what he was taught to do. He provided, and he gave us amazing trips. He gave us amazing things. I've got to experience so many amazing things growing up that a lot of people don't get to, and that's all because of him. But when it comes to like, I've probably count on one hand how many times he said, verbally, "I love you," or I don't think he ever said, "I'm proud of you," or he just kind of left that to my mom, because that's what the mom does. Okay. Right?
The nurture.
And so, yes. Yeah. And he's the provider, and he presides, and he tells us we can't jump in the pool on Sunday because he knows best. But going to the temple is optional. And he did the best he could, and he really was great. And a lot of people really, really admired him, and I admire him in a lot of ways. But in terms of being a dad, that I needed, his absence honestly really contributed to my narcissism, and I take full responsibility for it. And now I'm trying to change that. But I mean, I watched Mary Poppins the other night just because I was craving something jolly and childhood, because you got to have childlike joy in this life. I think we take everything too seriously, but that whole movie is not about her changing the children. It's about her changing the dad. Yeah. Getting the dad to be there. And that just shows you how crucial it is. And I think the church doesn't really emphasize that at all. The involvement is superficial. Right. Lead your family in righteousness. But like, what does that mean? Once again, just abstract ideas, no practical thing of like, your dad, you grew up in the 1950s in Salt Lake City, where it's pretty chauvinistic and patriarchal. Here's some things that can kind of help you, connect with your wife more and your kids more. There's not that in the church.
The one thing that I remember is that goofy commercial from the late 80s or so that was like, fatherhood, isn't it about time? And it was the dad like playing catch with his son or whatever, which
Yeah.
was probably as touchy-feely as the church ever got with
Yeah.
teaching men to be present for their children. So it's one thing to spend time with your kids. It's another thing to spend time with your kids one-on-one and have meaningful conversations with them, and to say the words like you were saying, I love you, I'm proud of you. And also, it's safe for you to tell me things. You can talk to me.
Yeah.
I'm going to be here for you to support you if you do something wrong. If you fail, I'm here. I've got you. Those are conversations that I never got any of that kind of support from my parents. In fact, it was the opposite, as we've been talking about. I did not ever feel safe to tell my parents anything. And in fact, I felt like most of the time I had to lie to them because I knew what they wanted to hear. And I knew what I was going to say was going to upset them, anger them, be shameful for them. And so most of the time I lied and told my parents I was fine, told them I was doing all the stuff they wanted me to do. And most of the time I did, but I was also a human being. And so
Yeah.
when I did make mistakes, or I did have questions, or I did have problems, or I did have doubts, I did not feel safe to talk to my parents about it.
I was
So
scared to death of my father. So
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So men are not taught in the church at all about how to meaningfully connect with their children.
Not at all. I don't think they are. I think the only ones that do got lucky, and their dads taught them properly.
Right.
But you don't learn that in the church.
Right. In fact, I think what we're really taught as parents in the church is that if we set a perfect example for our kids, that they'll never go astray.
Yes. Yes.
And then also, because we know that our kids are getting worthiness interviews from the bishop and from their other leaders all the time, my parents, at least, I think they probably felt like, well, she's going to learn all of that from her leaders. And if something comes up in a worthiness interview that's of real concern, they're going to let us know rather than having a conversation with me about it. And I know that was particularly true of sex ed. I was not allowed to watch the sex ed movies in school. I was given the weird permission slip to go to the library instead because my parents did not want me getting the secular version. But then they also didn't take the time to ever talk to me personally about it. I think the assumption was like, you're learning all of this in Young Women's, and the standards night and the For Strength of Youth pamphlet, that's going to teach you all of that stuff. So I'm curious about that for you. Were there ever conversations with your dad about consent or about sexual responsibility of any kind or any of that?
Never. And you bring up a really great point. So my dad passed away 5.5 years ago. When we did reveal that we were leaving the church, it exactly happened what we thought would happen. He didn't really talk to us. It was never the same, and he passed away, and we never reconciled. But since then, I've had really good conversations with my mom about all of this, and she's taken it in stride and been really good. And she said those exact words because I kind of brought up the whole where she got really mad at me for, hormones are flying and, kissing a girl, whatever.
Yeah.
Consensual.
For doing perfectly developmentally normal things as a teenage boy, right?
And I still remember it, like she just ripped into me and was bawling. But I was like, Mom, you didn't teach me at all why that was bad or anything about sex. Like I was never taught anything about that. And she said, that's just kind of something we expected you to learn in the church.
Mm.
What do you know? Like if you are thinking that the education in the church is going to substitute the conversations you need to have with your kids, it's not even close. My dad never had those conversations. Honestly, he would leave all the disciplining and talking to my mom. And if we were acting up, he would yell at my mom.
Wow.
Not us.
Wow. That must have been really hard to witness.
Yeah, we thought he was an asshole. And and hypocritical. My dad, basically, if you look at it from the perspective of the church, became very successful financially, had high ranking up positions, and was admired. And I'm sure a lot of people, wanted to be like my dad, but I can tell you my dad had a miserable life. He was alone in his own house. He was anxious and nervous all the time. And I don't think he ever lived one authentic day where he actually felt true joy. And that's the problem with this system. He did everything right for the most part. And he was a stranger in his own home. He died early, scared, and he never reconciled with his 3 boys, And I know before he did die, he wanted to, and I know he regrets it. And all because of this stupid church. Sorry.
See, that's so telling to me that as a white male, and let's just throw in white, cisgendered, heteronormative male, married to a woman, had children, got married in the temple, checked all the boxes, did everything right, was successful financially and professionally, probably got lots of accolades professionally, and then was awarded ever increasing responsibility in the church, higher positions, higher callings, bishop, and then in the stake presidency. That's all a man can hope for.
That's how we aspire, and we do aspire to it.
Yeah.
Because we want that recognition.
Yeah.
And he
short
got it.
of being in the in crowd in Salt Lake and knowing apostles and prophets and being called to an apostleship or to the quorum of the 70 or something like that, your dad achieved the pinnacle of what every man in the church is taught that they're supposed to do. He did everything right. He did everything he was told to do. He lived his life exactly the way they told him to. And he died unhappy and anxious and you said in your words that he never experienced true joy, which is what the church teaches us is if we will do everything the way that they tell us to, that we will have happiness and joy. And here's a perfect example of someone who was the ideal Mormon and did everything that he was told to do, and yet still never experienced that joy and had terrible relationships with his wife and children.
Exactly.
That's so sad.
I know. He seriously, like everyone else looking at his life, like at the funeral, and everyone would just be like, oh, he did it. Like, wow, he did it. But if you'd actually known, man, no.
How old was he when he died?
72.
Wow.
Just turned 72.
Which is young for, especially for Mormon standards.
Yeah, I think he had a lot of stress. And honestly, I kind of, as much as I didn't want to become like him, I have. But it's also given me a chance to really feel deep empathy for him. And we have so much more information now about how to cope with these feelings, what these feelings are, what is depression, what is anxiety, how to address them. Like, I feel so much more equipped than he did. And I've still struggled big time, but I've been able to work through it. He didn't have any of those tools. And he just didn't understand why his family was detached from him, why he was angry all the time, why, but at least he had his patients. Like, I'm grateful that he had them and they all loved him. And I hope he got some validation from that. But other than that, man, he gave us everything. And I bet he was so confused and just so, and honestly, I could feel what he felt until I kind of went through this inner child healing to kind of unblock this narcissism. And if I lived with that for my whole life, I would have not lasted. 72 years.
Yeah. But I do want to talk about your journey and sort of your self-awareness. Like, how did you become aware that, and I know you talked about your relationship and just listening to women, but how did you develop this ability to see where some of your problematic behaviors came from relationally? And was there sort of a light bulb moment for you, or did it happen gradually over time?
Yeah, it was kind of gradual, but more so just like I hurt someone I really, really care about. And I actually listened to what her experience was like and how I made her feel. And there's been some things throughout my life where I couldn't relate with a certain guy, or like a really sweet, just humble man. And I'd always want to be like, I wish I was more like him. Like, I can't understand how he's like that. And so I knew there was kind of that. And then you just start to realize how big of a role what you see growing up imprints on you. And I started to see and feel exactly what my dad did. And then I started to see how my mom contributed to that, or allowed that to happen, or maybe even made it worse under the most positive intentions. I just started to realize things about myself that started to make sense of why I felt like that. Like, there was times where I was like, this was in rehab, when I was really, you're faced with some times to just sit there and think through all of this. And it's like, am I a good person, or do I just want to do the good things so that people think I'm a good person? And that was rough.
Yeah.
Because I didn't know. And then I started to think about my upbringing, and you just start to realize that everything you were taught is not really you. And you're that pure joy 4-year-old kid that's just pure of light and exploration and curiosity. And that's who we are. That's who we all are at our core. And thinking about that unity, and then doing some exercises and realizing that all of this was just a product of upbringing and then some maladaptive things. And so then it made it really easy to, you get on all the resources now, ChatGPT, what are some indicators of this? I was raised with this. And then it was really easy to start to piece together maybe why my integrity was strong in front of other people, but alone, I just didn't care because it was just me and myself. And then I realized, some of the connections we made today. But it came from a strong desire to not feel this pain and agony anymore. And I think what really helped was I finally just allowed myself to feel the shame. And that was like agonizing scream crying. And it even surprised me. And I just admitted and I accepted that I hurt someone I loved, and I am the reason they're gone, and I am the reason they're hurting. So you kind of let that go, and then you will do anything to not feel that. And so I'm like, there's something here. There's something wrong with me, honestly, a little bit, that I no longer want to feel like this. And I know that I've tried to kind of analyze. I've always tried to analyze my way out of things, but then I think I had a really good healer kind of come and say, you actually got to go through and maybe heal those parts of you and your inner child. And that actually made me want to become a healer. And I'm a few hours away from being a certified healer, because I really believe in inner child healing. And I believe a lot of these wounds and a lot of these blocks come from what we were taught as a little kid. And there's a way to go back and talk to that sweet little girl or boy and make them feel safe and let them kind of take over more. And then it's so much easier to love everyone else. And it's so much easier to give all these Mormons a pass and just not hate them or be so frustrated that they can't see what you see, but just understand they're just doing their best of what they think is right. And everyone's at a different point, but I hope to be able to bring light that it is possible. And to the Mormons out there, you bear testimony all the time. I've been in the church and I have felt the Spirit so strong. And I served a 2-year mission. Oh, we didn't even get into that. A 2-year mission is a breeding ground for emotional manipulation. That's where we learn how to emotionally manipulate really, really well.
100%.
But I felt all of those wonderful things. And now in the past 6 months, I have felt this. And it's unlike anything I have ever felt before. It is true joy. And ever since that, I'm looking for that. And if you're in the church or whatever, there is something far greater. And it doesn't come from God. And it doesn't come from the Holy Ghost. It comes from you loving your inner child, because we're all just truth. We're all pure light. And then we get blankets thrown on us to protect us. And then we adapt. And so I would say it just, once you understand that, then it's easy to start to see where manipulation started, where you were taught it's more important to, get up there and bear your testimony when you have that BYU interview coming up, and you need to look good, and, you do everything you need to do to get by. And that's just learned behavior. And that's not what our true nature is.
Yeah.
And once you accept that I did this to avoid shame, and it made perfect sense for me because I was the youngest of 4 and I was the baby, and everyone just loved on me. And we avoided conflict like the plague. And I kind of became a different person around my oldest brother, a different person around my next brother, a different person around my sister, to keep everyone happy. Yeah. And then you just do some nice self-reflection, and it's really motivating because on the other side of that discomfort is real breakthrough where you can unblock a ton of joy.
Do you feel that developing compassion for yourself helped you to have compassion for other people?
Yeah. And a big thing with narcissism and where if we're incapable of loving ourselves, how are we capable of loving our partner to the extent that they deserve? Yeah. And you have to be willing to give yourself some grace and understand a lot of this healing is going back and just learning that all these things you've done have been just to adapt. And it's what you saw growing up. And the second you become aware of it is the second you can heal it. So yes, I still struggle with it, or I'm a work in progress, because I still do things that I don't love. But unfortunately, when you're raised with the church and you're trying to be perfect, and you're just, any bad thing you do, you have to repent of it immediately to get it so you're clean. That is not how you live a great life. You live a great life by screwing up and learning and experiencing and changing your mind and seeing new perspectives. If you just live trying to avoid sin, that is going to lead you to just trying to live a comfortable life, and it's going to be a very unfulfilling life. And that's so sad.
Yeah, it is really sad. Yeah.
But yes, you got to learn to love yourself. And what really helped me was that I just kind of saw that these bad things and how I hurt someone was what I was shown, and my adaptation to that growing up. And then that became imprinted. And and you see and you start to act how your parents acted. And well, did your dad, how did your dad treat your mom? And if you're a guy and you can say, not very well, then you got to be careful. You got to be real careful.
Yeah.
Because if you don't want to do that, you saw it, and that's imprinted.
It was modeled for you every single day. Yeah. You saw those interactions. And for me, I saw a lack of healthy communication from my parents.
Oh, yeah.
There was
conflict resolution.
Right. Healthy conflict resolution didn't exist.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I definitely want to have you back to talk about emotional manipulation in the mission, because I think that is another key to unlocking how narcissism happens. Like when we learn how to emotionally manipulate people, and we learn that that's not only for their own good, but for the greater good of humanity, that's institutional narcissism. And I'd love to have another conversation about that as well.
Yeah, to add that layer of, you know, to work your way up in the patriarchy, and in the male is you got to be powerful, charismatic, good businessman, and that's true in the church. But then you add this whole be seen to be spiritual and emotional. That adds a whole new level of manipulation that is toxic as hell. And we all learn how to do it on our missions. Just real quick, if all the guys hearing this are starting to get upset, when you're giving that lesson to an investigator and you're up next and you're going to recite Joseph Smith's first vision, you're trying to build up some emotionality to it. You're trying to present it in something so they will feel something. That's emotional manipulation.
Yeah.
Plain and simple.
Yeah. And that's just scratching the surface of it. There's another, and that's why I say when I have you back, because we could talk for another 2 or 3 hours about the emotional manipulation piece of it.
Yeah, and I'm gonna start talking about this more because I really I want guys to start I want this to be more of a normal conversation. I know it's uncomfortable. It was uncomfortable to me to learn that I had benefited the most from this, and I didn't want to give up that power. But it's the only way to feel true joy.
Yeah.
I really believe so.
I agree with
Because
you.
narcissism, being that unauthentic, being not authentic and putting a mask on every day, even the nuanced little bit, if it's not blatant, it's still there, and it can really get in the way of your capacity for love for yourself and for other people.
Yeah, I think you said something really key right at the beginning, that narcissism is a mechanism for shame avoidance. And I just keep coming back to the idea that we can't avoid shame or other painful and difficult emotions without also shielding ourselves from experiencing true joy. And I think that's a lot of what you've been saying today. And that resonates really deeply with me. I think as a person who was raised in a narcissistic family system, I think more than anything, I dissociated so often just to avoid feeling the painful feelings that came up for me. And what I realized is that there are huge gaps of time in my kids' growing up lives that I don't remember. Being a young mom, especially when things were really difficult, and I knew like my marriage was not healthy, my relationship with my parents wasn't healthy, I wasn't healthy. It's really sad to me that all those defense mechanisms prevented me from really experiencing life. And so if there's one small change that I think really did change everything for me, it's, as you were saying, the ability to just sit in that shame, to sit in that pain, to feel those feelings, and to go through the hell of the scream crying, because on the other side is that beautiful place where you can really experience true joy. So that's what resonated with me the most about today. Thank you so much for being so vulnerable about it.
You're welcome. You're absolutely right in that the church really prevents you from living.
Yeah.
And participating on a full, great way to understand yourself and to improve. And the only way we really improve is we go through that uncomfortable part, and we feel that shame and we accept it and we own it. We take responsibility, but we do it with compassion.
Yeah.
So much of that wasn't necessarily our fault, but we got to deal with it now. And we have a responsibility to teach the youngers, to get the word out so that we have more unity, because that's what it's all about. And that's not what the church teaches. It's like exclusion. Unity.
Yeah.
We're all after this universal joy. Going through discomfort, I believe, is universal.
Yeah, I agree with you. And it's so ironic, the church teaches that we're all about families and we're all about unity, but they really aren't. They're about
Not at all.
separation, and they're about families with an asterisk, only if you fit into this little box. But as you have very well proven to us today, you can do everything right in the church and still not experience life as a human being, and still not really have a fullness of joy, to borrow their phrase.
It's real, and unfortunately I feel bad for him, but I know now he does experience that. He gets it all. We've had conversations where he gets it, and I get it, and he's sorry, but it's also like he did the best he could, and now it's all good. And
Yeah.
I believe it is all good now. And so I hope that I'm going to start making more videos about this on the House of Deconstruction, because I think it is crucial, and I think all men have it. Maybe not as much as I had it, but awareness is everything. And man, I'm telling you, you can actually truly experience some joy, and that access to joy and love is so much better when you unblock this crap and you go
Yeah.
through the shame and you work through it. Better than any joy I've ever felt.
Well, that's amazing. Thank you so much for being here and for everything you shared today. Everybody go follow John on House of Deconstruction. Is there anything else that you're
Thank you.
excited about that you want to tell us about?
Oh man. The healing part, I think, is also universal. I'm excited about that, and it's a lot of what we talked about today, of really just shedding all of the worldly matrix programming, and that we've been kind of sheltered, and our joy has been tamped down with all of government and everything, and I think we're all waking up. We're entering the age of Aquarius, and everything's starting to be revealed. And now's the time where I think people are going to really just go after their purpose, their passion, and their joy, rather than do what's expected of them. And that's not good for the church, which I love to see it. But let's go. Chase your joy and go through the uncomfortable parts to get there, and listen to women, guys, please.
Yeah, it's so interesting for me to listen from a man's perspective. There are so many things that I didn't consider as a woman growing up in the church, and I've had more conversations with men like you, listening to the pressures that you guys felt, and some of the difficulties and struggles that you guys went through. I think it's so important for us to listen to each other, because whether it's a binary of male, female, or whether it is just someone else who's had different life experiences than you, the only way that we really learn how to truly be compassionate is by listening to the voices of people that are different than ours, and to get outside of our echo chamber and experience new things and see new things and talk to people we've never talked to before. Because what I think I try to talk about more often than anything else is that we have so much more in common than we have different. We all want the same things. We all want peace and prosperity for ourselves and our people that come after us. We all want connection. We all want love and belonging. These are things that are universal to the human experience. And if we can pull aside the curtains of politics and religion and culture and dogma, and really see each other as human beings, I think the world's going to be a better place.
And I think we're heading in that direction. I think a lot of people are waking up to that. Beautifully put. So a lot of things are changing, but I think it's for the better, I hope.
Yeah.
And so I'm excited about healing. I'm excited about helping people, whether it's guys trying to understand their narcissism or see their blind spots, or even like, are you dating a narcissist? I could probably give you a little help with that, because I have been one, and I know how we think, unfortunately. But this is how we help each other out. And once again, I've always, in like my healing journey, I've just always felt this want for all these arguing back and forth with politics. Like, wouldn't it just be so great if we all just came together and we all were one, and that's what it's all about. And hopefully this can help that a little bit.
I hope so too. Well, I'm looking forward to lots more conversations with you.
Awesome. It's great being here. Love what you're doing as well. And I love the midlife revolution. I love that. It shouldn't be a crisis. It can be an awakening in the best way.
Yeah, exactly. Awakening. I love that.